Hello, it's Shari here today, and I'm going to be making this coffee-themed Valentine using the Thanks a Latte set from the winter release. So I have Thanks a Latte, and I'm also going to be using Riley's ABCs to create a custom sentiment. I've already cut a zigzag panel, rectangular panel out of Nina Solar White cardstock. And I'm going to start by stamping the second half of my sentiment that says You a Latte. I've already put it on a block with Riley's ABCs, and I'm going to white emboss it, and then I'm going to ink over it so that embossing will resist the ink that I put on it. So I'm going to use my powder tool here just to get rid of any static that's down there. And part of the reason I'm putting the embossing on first is because this ink will be kind of wet. It takes a little while to soak in and dry, and I don't want to have to wait for it to dry before I can do my embossing, because that embossing powder would stick to that ink. So I've stamped my sentiment with the clear embossing ink, and now I'm just adding the white embossing powder. So I'm using my heat tool to heat that up and melt that embossing powder, so I'm going to have that nice white sentiment along the bottom there. Now that that embossing powder has cooled, I can start the inking of my panel, and I have 3 colors of Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to start with Wild Honey on the bottom. And you can see it's kind of covering up my letters, but you'll see here in a second, I'll grab a paper towel and just kind of buff that ink off that embossing powder so you'll see it. See how you can see the white now. And then the next color I'm going in with is Worn Lipstick. And then I'm just going to go back and forth between the two and sort of blend those together. They're going to make a nice little orangey color between that pink and that yellow. Then on top I'm going to do some picked raspberry for a nice bright pink. I think that these 3 colors together sort of looks like a sunset, but I just liked the real brightness of it. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more picked raspberry at the top to make it nice and dark. Now that I've got all my colors on there, I'm actually going in with a pink metallic watercolor. These are the gem colors, the Gansai Tambi gem colors. And I'm just going to get this nice and soupy with my watercolor brush here. And then I'm just going to do some pink flecks. And actually this watercolor has some white in it too, so you kind of get more of a pearly white but with just a tint of pink on it, which I think looks really nice with that pink in the background. I'm trying to cover up the bottom of my sentiment just a little bit, but in the end what gets on that white embossing powder I can just dab off with the paper towel, so you'll see at the end I do that. I did get some nice drops of water there, which kind of move the oxide around a little bit just to create some more interest, and I think these look cute like little bubbles in the background. So I'm going to set that aside to dry, and then I'm going to work on the other part of my sentiment. So I have this Scripty Love cut out, and this is just cut out of Nina cardstock as well, but I wanted it to match the pearliness of my background a little bit. So what I'm actually going to do is go in with the white that is in this metallic watercolor set, and I'm not going to get it super wet, so this is kind of be like dry brushing it almost, just enough to get it on the brush, and I'm going to cover this die cut love with it. I'm not getting it too wet because this is not watercolor, so I don't want it to warp too much. I'm actually going to end up stacking a couple of these die cuts in the end so it's nice and thick, but this top layer will have just a nice soft white shimmer to it to match the shimmer I've got going in the background. So once I've got that covered, I'll just set that aside to dry as well. And then I can work on my images. So I'm going to stamp out both of the coffee cups in this set. And I also stamped out the little heart, but I did not end up using it in the end because the spacing I had with my cups didn't really have a place for the heart without it being too crowded. I'm also stamping the latte in the top with some dough ink. And I'm using this because I like that it has a heart in the middle of it, so it really goes well with the sentiment and the heart with sort of a Valentine's theme. And then I'm just going to add some faces. And I'm stamping all this, other than the dough ink, the coffee part of it, with the jet black ink because I'm going to color it very, very simply with some Copic markers. And I wanted my cups to just have a slight tint of color. I didn't want them to be distracting from the colors of the background. So I'm just going in with a very light aqua color. This is a BG10. I'm just pulling that color in from the outer edge towards the center. And actually the center of him doesn't even get any marker at all. But he's just going to have a very light wash of this aqua color to give him a little bit of color. And when I go and do the top right above the coffee, I'm going to be very careful not to touch that brown ink because that is not Copic friendly ink. But if you're very careful, it's going to be perfectly fine. There's no need to color on that brown ink anyways. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the other cup. I wanted this one to have just a yellow creamy color, so I'm going with the E00 and giving it sort of a cream color. Just again pulling it from the outside edge towards the center where kind of the shine of the light would be. And again, I'm doing the inside of the rim and just being careful not to color on top of that brown ink. This one I felt like needed a little bit more, so I went in with my E000 and just kind of colored in the center. Now I'm going in with some Peachy Keen ink, and I'm just going to stamp the cute little rosy cheeks that comes in this set. I'm stamping this after I colored so that I did not smear it with my Copic marker. Now I can use the coordinating dies to cut out my images. And I can start to assemble my card. So I've got some foam tape here. I'm putting it on the back of that zigzag panel that I colored with the ink. And I just want to pop it up off this card base. Now, it's hard to see. This card base is cut out of the wood grain white cardstock. So it has some nice texture to the background. It's just not very obvious on the camera right now. But I'm going to center up that panel on that wood grain card base. And then I'm just going to place my images on here where I want them so I can see where to put that sentiment at the top. And you can see that's not exactly sturdy because I did put water on it to put that metallic on there. But I've cut 4 more of that Scripty Love, and I'm just going to use my liquid glue and cover those and stack them so I have a thick sentiment. So I'll stack 4 of these just cut out of white cardstock, and then on the very top layer I'll put the one that I put the coat of pearl shimmer on. So now that I've got all these pieces stacked together, that shimmery one is on the top, I can just adhere that down to my colorful panel here towards the top. Now I'm going to use some foam adhesive squares for my cups. Now the one I'm using on this cup is a thinner foam square, so he's going to kind of not be popped up quite as much as the cup on top. And then I'll use the regular thickness foam squares for the other cup. So it kind of gives it even more dimension because they're at 2 different levels. Now my cups were a little too snug to the love, so I did not end up using that heart. If I'd brought them down a little bit, I might have had room, but I kind of like it the way it is. Nice and simple, and I love that bright background with those white looking cups with just a tint of color. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.